how archaeology in prehistory has warped spiral dynamics. Hello, this is Chris speaking with a video about spiral dynamics and how early spiral dynamics and still present spiral dynamics has been influenced by a wrong archaeology in prehistory. Until about 20 years ago, the prehistory and archaeology that dominated the Western scholars agreed that there has been never any kind of civilization worth mentioning in the Americas, for example. With maybe the examples of the Aztecs, but that was not expounded upon much. Now, we know that the exact opposite is true. Only you don't read about it in the newspapers and so on because some people don't care, and for some people it's horrible to admit that our whole idea of history was wrong. So far we believed in Europe and America and so on, in the West and the first world countries, that we were the cradle of civilization. Okay, maybe there were one or two other cradles like India and China, but mostly Europe and the Mediterranean area were the cradle of civilization, and everywhere else there were just hunter-gatherers or nomads, which in spiral dynamics terms we would coin mostly purple. Purple is the tribal stage just above the most base level of subsistence, which would be beige. So after beige, where almost no one is centered in, purple is the next stage, primitive hunter-gatherer, nomad tribes, small tribes. Naive, superstitious idiots, so to say. Well, on the other hand, we had the European civilizations which already overcame purple and overcame red and is now in blue-orange, mostly orange. That was the spiral dynamics conclusion based on prehistory, history, archaeology, ethnology, and so on, which was partly absolutely wrong. And all evidence to the contrary has been suppressed until the evidence became unignorable during the last 20 years. So Europe basically made the shift from purple to orange within the last 2000 years. Influenced by Egyptian, Roman, Greek, Persian culture, all the Gauls and Germans and Goths and whatnot, they reached a very high level of civilization around 1500, about 1500 years. After there were still small tribes running through the forests of Europe. And because of our industrialization and natural sciences, we finally made the jump from blue to orange in the 19th century. But even beforehand, we had amazing orange inventions like the book printing press or the black powder and many other interesting stuff, mostly weaponized. What does civilization mean? Civilization means a culture that is capable of buildings and sustaining cities with inhabitants of 10,000 and more people, at least 10,000. 10,000 in the Middle Ages and Renaissance and Baroque times was a normal city size. Except the capitals, they could have more, up to 1 million even. But usually not. Usually the capitals were around 100,000. 10,000 was a normal large city. When the first conquerors of Central and South America came upon Aztec cities, especially the capital, they saw that the city is much larger than the usual large European city, with apothecaries and sewage canals and all kinds of sophisticated stuff, all the way to art and dishes and so on. Now, what many people did, including the finders and inventors of spiral dynamics, is to apply legal positivism. Legal positivism or any positivism means that the way it is the correct or only way. So what spiral dynamics scientists have adopted from other disciplines like history and archaeology is that the way our European culture and offshoots thereof worked and developed was the only way a civilization could develop, also within the terminology of spiral dynamics. So only our way of moving through purple, moving through red, moving through blue, arriving at orange and now moving towards green is the only way, including the way we waged wars, killed off animals, killed off each other, and polluted our environment. Now, the way we build factories and spray poison around us and cause radiation and other catastrophes, that's just normal. It has to be like that. That's the way to go through orange. You have to invent all this stuff and then shit happens, but you eventually move through to green. And the only other alternative is to remain in purple, remain stupid, ignorant natives hopping around in small villages in the rainforest. And this is just not true. This was never true and is not true. There have been cities, large cities, in all of North America, Central America, and South America. These cities have been found to a large degree and described, but no one gave a damn because it didn't fit with the idea that a few hunter-gatherer tribes from Siberia went over the bridge to Alaska and down towards North America, then Central America, and then South America. And basically all human beings came from Africa and spread out from there about 100,000 years ago. And then the last ones to arrive anywhere were the ones who arrived in South America about 10, 20,000 years ago or later. And any kind of civilization like the Incas, for example, could only have existed for a maximum of 1,000 years. And this fits nicely with the idea that before the Sumerian and Egyptian culture, there was nothing. That's where it started. Yeah, they all came, hunter-gatherers came out of Africa. Of course, there were high civilizations in Africa as well, but they're also not talked about much. But anyway, some people fled from Africa, maybe because the Sahara was expanding. And then they started their first settlements in the Middle East, and from there it spread. Which is, by the way, not a theory that is adopted by many Chinese scholars. But that's a different matter altogether. The point here is that this may be true or might not be true, but what's definitely not true is that the only people who ever came to the Americas were the ones who went over the bridge between Siberia and Alaska. Also, it is not true that this happened very recently in history or prehistory, because there have been finds in Chile, for example, that are much, much, much older, more than 100,000 years ago, which is supposed to be around the time when the Africans left Africa. And the first conquerors who described the Amazon also reported large cities, cities of 20 kilometers in diameter. And were not single cities. There were several cities spread out over deforested expanse in the Amazon basin. And the Amazon basin, of course, is as much able to support large populations as the Tigris, Euphrates, Nile, Ganges, Yellow River, and so on were. And not many, in my knowledge, not many excavations were started to find these cities again that had been reported in the 16th and 17th century. But they were there with all kinds of gimmicks, technology, science, and so on. Large territories ruled by kings, many cities together, highways and whatnot. And also female warriors who were the reason why the Amazon was called Amazon. The Amazons were the female warriors in the ancient Greek Hercules saga. So there are eyewitness accounts and there are ruins of civilizations with large cities in North, Central and South America, which are impossible to explain by the kind of archaeology and prehistory that has been believed in until about 20 years ago. Now it's starting to change. So the point here for Spaldynamics is that our kind of civilization, our kind of technology is not the only way to arrive at blue or orange or green. And as I explained in the Kogi video, the Kogis, they call us younger brothers. When the conquistadores came, they had a civilization that was more advanced than ours. But they didn't have the kind of weaponry we had. And most importantly, they didn't have the diseases we imported. Yeah? A large part of the Central American population died from diseases. Central America and South America was not conquered by war and weapons and supreme technology. It was conquered by disease, like smallpox or measles. Same in North America. So many First Nation North Americans died from these diseases. And this is probably also why the Amazonian civilizations died off. We don't know. There was no big battle in the Amazon. No one was there, and of course it's quickly overgrown. But there was a civilization, or several, and it's gone now. But it was there. And it could have been much older than several hundred or 1,000 years old. Could have been very, very old. And the cities were just as large as European cities at the time, and the technology was at least at the same level. And if you look at the Kogi again, for example, who still have a living memory of their ancestors, how they lived before the conquistadores came. Same for some cultures in the Mexico area. We know now that there must be a different way to get to blue and orange, or green even. Yeah? The Kogi are a green culture, and they may have been a green culture already when the red-blue conquistadores came. That has happened many times in European history also. Like, for example, Rome. Rome was an aggressive red-blue culture, and the more it moved towards orange, the more vulnerable and weak it got, and then got conquered by other cultures that were a little bit behind, like the Goths, for example. So it's probably not like that, like we have been taught, that the great advanced Europeans went to the Americas and they conquered stupid tribes. It was more like that they encountered civilizations that were at least at the same level, probably more advanced, but they were more peaceful, more decadent maybe, weaker all in all, and especially they were susceptible to several diseases. And not so much the other way around. There's a rumor that syphilis was the disease the conquistadores brought back to Europe, and many people died of syphilis. And it certainly could have been worse. It could have been the other way around, that the conquistadores brought horrible diseases back and most 90% of the population of Europe would have died. That would have been possible, but it was not like that. 90% of the Europeans survived, but only 10% of the Americans. And all of this is kind of important nowadays, because whatever's happening nowadays with large companies more or less taking over the world in a steampunk kind of way, this would also be explained by some historians, sociologists, spell dynamics gurus and so on as normal orange. It's normal thing for orange that the companies become so strong and powerful that they're as powerful or even more powerful than governments, and thus can overcome the blue conservative government power and obstacles. So again, it's used in a positivistic way to say, okay, it has to be like that. If we want to get to green, orange has to become so bad first that a strong green has to emerge. The green has to be forced into existence by a horrible, oppressive, polluting orange. And the only other possibility is to go back to a primitive life of hunter-gatherer or nomads, which is anyway not possible anymore because we have such a large population, which is more than 10 times that of 2,000 years ago. So this, even if you wanted to go back to a hunter-gatherer or nomad life, we couldn't anymore. We have to move through orange with all its advantages and disadvantages, and then only we can arrive at green and finally at yellow. And this is the same racist bull that has dominated history, prehistory and archaeology until recently. And now is the beginning of finding out with evidence that this was never so. It's just an imagination, just European propaganda to put their own culture into a better, more sophisticated light. Many times the question has been asked in spell dynamic circles if it's necessary to go through red. Is it maybe possible that a purple culture can jump red and go directly to blue or green? Is it necessary to go through all colors? Is it necessary to go through red? And is it necessary to go through what we think orange is? And it is. But it doesn't have to express itself, manifest itself in the same way. Yeah, this kind of expansion, this red expansion that seems to be part of being able to build cities. Without red, you do not arrive at a city building size of culture, at a civilization. And without blue, you cannot sustain it and maintain it. And without orange, neither. You need the technology, for example, of navigation, of medicine, to have sewage and medications and so on to support such a large civilization of 10,000 people living close to one another in one city without them dying off by hunger or disease. And then technology, for example, you can see with examples of India and China. They were technology-wise far ahead of Europe. But they didn't weaponize all of it. So only the weaponization and also the development of navigation skills to build vessels strong and large enough to carry troops enabled the Europeans to conquer the rest of the world. But the knowledge and the science was there already. And in the case of India, science was also not only used in a material way, but also in a spiritual way. They had a spiritual science called yoga. But they had found and employed the methodology of science and the mathematics needed for the kind of technology we invented in Europe just as well. They just didn't do it. They didn't go in that aggressive direction. And the same was true for the American cultures. There were cultures comparable with the Indus civilization and the Yellow River civilization and Greece and Rome and even the medieval European cities and civilizations and cultures. Even beyond that, it seems, from eyewitness reports. The only two things they did not have were the kind of weapons and maybe navigation, but navigation is disputed. And also they didn't feel the need to expand further. They didn't feel the need to sail west or east in search for gold. They had enough gold. They also had enough to eat. Nothing pushed them farther. Nor did they have monotheistic religions that drove them or would have driven them to conquer the rest of the world and bring the light of God to the heretics. So it's very much possible that those cultures were already in orange or even green, while the Europeans were at a lower state around blue, with red and orange influences on either side, and that it would have gone completely different in history if the diseases like smallpox and measles wouldn't have wiped out 90% of the American population. So for me, two answers are given here by the modern archaeology and prehistory that started about 20 years ago. Firstly, yes, you have to go through red and orange, but it can manifest another way. And secondly, it has been done already. To live as a hunter-gatherer or nomad is not the only alternative to our destructive way of living today, to our way of orange today, but there not only is there the possibility of another way, it has existed already. Unfortunately, it has not survived, but not because of the European sophistication, not even of their weapon power, only because of the quirk of fate that diseases diminished those cultures and wiped out many of them. That's for you to consider and to ponder now. Have a good new 2022. Thank you for watching, listening. Thank you to all my Patreons. That means a lot for the continued support. Thank you for liking and subscribing and sharing the videos with your friends, and see you soon.